Hello and welcome to the Story Engine podcast. My name is Kyle Gray, and today on the show we have Margo Thomas. Margo is a lawyer that specializes in breakups, but not in the normal separations that you and I are used to seeing in terms of lawyers. This is for business divorces and some of the many emotional challenges that are very similar to a personal divorce, but has a lot more stress on the line when other people's jobs and livelihoods and many years of investment have been at stake. And so we're going to talk about Margo's process for helping these two people find their way through contentious situations and access the abundance and the better life that's before them. So without any further ado, let's hand it over to Margo Thomas. Margo Thomas, welcome to the Story Engine podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to dive in. You are an expert in a topic that I don't think we've explored on this show, but is at the heart of what many people go through at least some point in their entrepreneurial journeys. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you're showing up in the world today?
Absolutely. So I am owner of a law firm in Northern Virginia. We serve Maryland, DC, and Virginia primarily. And we do what we call business divorces, which is basically business partners who are going through a transition period, either with their business partner, a vendor, or a client, and we help them navigate that dispute. And in all of the free time I have outside of running this law firm, I'm a competitive swimmer, a distance swimmer. So I spend time traveling to different open water swim meets across the world. And I'm training for a 10K marathon swim next year. So I'm excited about that.
K marathon. That sounds extreme. Wow. Do you get to take breaks? Are there little places that you can rest in between, or are you're swimming 10 kilometers?
Depends. The one that I did on Sunday was a 5K and it was a number of laps, and they have what's called an Aussie exit where you have to actually get out of the water and run around a barrier to get back in the water to do the next lap. So,
Okay.
sometimes they're point to point, so they drop you off and you swim to a point. Sometimes they're laps. It just depends on where you're at and what type of race it is.
That's incredible. So tell us about our business divorces. You said that there's like transition and sometimes disputes. Are these always contentious relationships if they get to this point, or is there sometimes where it's more amicable and we're just having somebody mediate and keep it smooth for us?
They're mostly all very acrimonious, unfortunately, because by the time that we get involved, they're usually in litigation, have been sued or about to sue their business partner because they're at an impasse about how to move forward. So it's a little unlike, I'd say, regular divorce where there are, a lot of people who work through that amicably, even though, they may have to do a court filing to formalize the divorce. In our case, if they could do it themselves, they wouldn't be reaching out to us. So it's usually pretty acrimonious.
Yeah. What are some of the other things that come up? I'm sure like the disputes itself are only the beginnings of the problems and challenges that someone might have going through this. But if you're one of the main leaders on your team is now working against you, I'm sure there's different factions and things and impact on our team members and on other areas of the business you might not expect at first.
That's the thing that I love about this practice area. There's just so many iterations of it, even though it all stems from the same, usually a communication breakdown or personality conflict. But, it all starts with people who previously knew, like, and trusted the other person or parties involved. So there's always this emotional element to it that is usually driving some principled position that a party is trying to take. And our job in those situations is really to try to focus the discussion more on making a good business decision versus the principle or the fairness or the, just the emotional aspect of that. It can cause people a lot of trauma. It's always a difficult and stressful position because, like children, like you build a business, you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it, and it can become a very stressful and traumatic situation when you're in a situation where you may be walking away from that business or going forward with the business without one of the partners that you built it with. Both of those are very difficult transitions to make. And, we're only involved when the business is doing well because they have something to fight about. So that makes
Yeah.
it all the more stressful because there's a lot of money on the line, given where they're at.
Yeah. Um, are there business, or I guess before I say that, somebody else was on the podcast talking about making an allusion to when you build a house, you hire an architect and you kind of have a vision for what you want to build and it gets completed. And a lot of times entrepreneurs don't get architects. They start building things kind of room by room, furniture piece by furniture piece. And they without necessarily the ultimate vision of where it's supposed to be and go. And I think that this can, in some places of exits, cause problems, and in this place cause problems too, because it's not a clear structure, and there's a lot of things that are blended or just by the necessity of moving fast and breaking things and going to market and surviving. Which I'm sure, like if somebody, there's probably not business prenuptials or anything like that that would help people have an exit strategy if something like this happened, because it's just like a relationship. In the beginning there's lots of trust, and probably as more money comes in is when things start to get even more heated. Like you said, it's rarely a problem when there's no money around, but yeah, if you're not prepared for when there is money, then things can get dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent a lot of time trying to promote the business prenup, as you said,
Oh, okay.
because that's not something a lot of people think about, but it is something that can help make these situations a lot easier, a lot faster, a lot cheaper. And I think that that is the brilliance of being an entrepreneur, that you're able to move quickly and not see all the pieces fit together, but be able to lean into it and just believe that it will be something amazing. And, that can also be to a detriment because there may be steps that you do not take to protect that thing because you're so focused on building the thing. And, that is why, I love working with entrepreneurs because they're all very, brilliant individuals who have built something that started with just a thought and an idea, and just seeing how far they have went and made that into a reality and led people to join their team and promote whatever it is that they're doing has been fascinating, because I'm an entrepreneur who owns a law firm. So, watching business people excel is really motivating. But yes, I think that it's like a gift and a curse at the same time. You're not,
Yeah,
a lot of entrepreneurs, they're able to make decisions not having all the information. They're able to pivot, move quickly. All of those things can certainly be a detriment when it comes to like the prenup, because that's not something that really aligns with moving fast and getting the thing built.
totally. um and yeah, you point out a pattern, and I think a lot of people who are entrepreneurs are subject to that kind of pattern. Do you have any kind of tips or guidelines or questions that we could ask that would help us be more aware of this and anticipate these things before? I know it might be damaging your client base a little bit to give away this kind of information, but how can we prevent ourselves from having to see you? If you have any good tips for that, like how do we prevent ourselves from getting into the position where we need to call you?
Well, I guess my clients fall into a couple of buckets, but there are some that enter into, business partnerships without giving that much thought into the relationship with the other person. They may like them and have known them for a while, but this is a different dance, right? So, um, similar to marriage, you can have a lot in common, but there can be some, impasse things that are, principles or things that go to the core of your being that are opposed to the person that you
Mm,
really do like. And, I think it's really about getting to the meat of those issues early on and having those discussions. A lot of people don't even scratch the surface of having those discussions because they are friends. But,
hmm.
this is not that type of relationship. And I think that that would probably avoid about, I don't know, 30 to 40% of the people that we see, because, they're just like, well, I'm good at finances and you're good at architecture. So we should just move forward and build this thing, like. I think
What
there
are
needs
some
to
of the
be a deeper
questions or
discussion
like,
about that.
yeah, how could we have these discussions? Like, what happens when we make $1 million? Is that a question? Or like, what are
Absolutely.
some of these? How do we enter and like get on the meat of this metaphor?
Absolutely. That's it. A lot of the impasse comes from the difference in vision. Some people are more
Hmm.
risk averse, some people want to bet the company, some people want to grow it to 100 people, some people want to keep it small and local. I mean, all of, what does this look like? And what's going to happen when there's an issue? What's going to happen when we don't have enough money in the bank to pay the payroll? Are you going to put are you going to go out and get a personal loan so we can pay our employees? Are you going to say, maybe we should shut down and consider something else? Like, let's talk about the hard part now, because there are going to be some very difficult decisions that need to be made. And I want to know what your, worldview is on, what happens when there's adversity? Do you lead in or do you run? And how has that been
Hmm.
exhibited in your life to this point? Because I think there are a lot of examples in our lives that go to how we handle trauma and transition. And, I think that just having simple conversations and asking those questions goes a long way. There's a lot of dispute over who did what. I mean, we call it the IKEA effect, where if you go to IKEA and you build something, you feel like it's worth more than you bought it for because you put your hard work into it, and that's like every business owner feels that way. Like they always feel like I did more, right? And
Hmm.
how do you prevent that feeling from occurring? And I think the answer to that is being very specific about who is going to do what. My expectation of you is that you're going to be here every day. That is a huge problem. People are like, well, they never even come into the office. Well, they always work from home. They don't consider coming into the office as something that they need to do to check a box, right? And there's just different
Hmm.
viewpoints on that. I'm a work from home person. I've always been that way. So, let's talk about that. Is that going to bother you? Because I'm never going to be there. I'll be working, but and I don't work between 9 to 5. Is that going to bother you? Those type of things. I don't think it's like brain surgery or some very complex questions, but I think it's the same things that you would ask in a real marriage. Let's talk about your views on money. Money is a huge
Hmm.
one. Let's talk about your views on money. Is your checking account overdrawn? Do you pay your bills on time? Does this keep you up at night? Let's talk about those things.
And you hinted at something deeply personal, which is
Mhm.
kind of obvious in a romantic relationship, but
Mhm.
I see happens a lot of our traumas influence and oftentimes are like a backseat driver that comes and grabs the wheel. And these little things that maybe happened at a very young age can play a role in high emotion, high intensity decisions. And actually being aware of those, which isn't always a fashionable thing to do, um, can play a huge role in this. You said already there was like an emotional element that's driving their position, and I think it's a combination of the current reality of things. A lot of money's on the table and a lot of high stress situation, and it's a pretty reliable like law of emotional physics that we will fall back on our trauma patterns as the higher stakes rise. And entrepreneurship is a crucible of this. The skeletons are going to come out of your closet as you grow by nature of growth.
But, I think the flip side of that is, you can be so afraid to partner with someone that you don't ever reach your full potential. There's a lot of great
Mm.
things that can come from a successful partnership, because people are bringing skill sets that the other person may not have, or experiences, or capital, or, I think that it can be something that is very fruitful, and you can grow the business bigger than you ever could have done on your own if you make the right decision when it comes to a partner. But the reverse can also be true.
Absolutely. And what do you think some of the things are that you do uniquely or differently that you bring to this formula that makes this process smoother and better and more successful?
I'm an active listener, and
Hmm.
I think that that is required to sift through a lot of information because people are multifaceted and they usually don't lay out exactly what their expectations are and how they prioritize either getting out of this situation or money or protection from potential liability. I mean, people, you have to be a very active listener and repeat a lot of things back to people and make sure that they know what they want. And those wants can change, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think we're very good at validating the emotions that people are going through during this process. And I think that that can be overlooked by a lot of attorneys because it's a business transaction, right? But you got to be aware that this is more than that to a lot of people. So, I hear a lot of people say, I shouldn't feel this way. And I'm like, what do you mean you shouldn't feel this way? That is a valid feeling. This is the
Mm-hmm.
process that you need to go through to get to the outcome that you want. So, we ask people to, feel the feelings, but, we try to get them to focus on the good business decision at the end of the day and try to get them to focus less on principle. Principle is a
Mm-hmm.
crowded platform, as they say. And, that usually,
Totally.
prohibits a solution. I think we lean a lot into talking about, like I said, the emotional aspect of it, what it's going to take to fight this fight and what they'll be giving up to fight the fight. I don't think everybody talks about that. I tell a lot of clients there is a lot of abundance in front of you. And, you
Mm-hmm.
may be at the bottom of the hill and it may be very difficult to see that right now. But the longer you fight this fight, the more you may be giving up on pursuing that abundance. So I think you need to be very clearly aware of, what exactly you're giving up, not just money, but there's, emotional capital that goes into fighting with someone for a long period of time about things that happened in the past that are preventing you from focusing on things that could be happening in the future. So, we lay it all out there and, they make the choice they want to make, but I want to make sure they have all of the pieces to the puzzle to make that choice.
Yeah. And it sounds like most of them, because of the emotions, they're actually not as clear on what they want or what they would walk away from or what they're willing to let go of. And in college, I took a negotiation and mediation class in the law school. And it was one of the most valuable ones to really see, like, okay, let's figure out what each party like truly wants in this in a practical term and what we want to walk away with and what we want to negotiate for. And this actually gives us, when we're not in the emotional state, then, okay, I may be willing to concede A if you're willing to give me B, and this is each more valuable for us individually. And so people start to feel like they're winning more instead of being entrenched. Another thing you said before we started recording that I think is something unique about what you do. You mentioned that you help people tell their stories like I do. And I think that sharing a story in this context of showing a perspective and a point of view and allowing people to immerse themselves in that experience to see the lens is really, really important. Can you tell me a little bit about how you weave that into your process?
Yes. I think that's the thing I like about my job the most is to be able to tell somebody's story in a way that is compelling to even them. Like they don't even see it. They couldn't tell the story this way. They feel like we have captured the essence of what they are trying to convey to a court or to a mediator or to opposing counsel. And whenever I hear a client say, you have hit the nail on the head, I couldn't have said it that well, or, you painted the picture that I've been trying to convey this whole time, that really gives us, a great sense of gratification from being able to do that. But I feel like that's our job. It's kind of like a play, like we're picking the actors and we're telling them what to say and telling them where to go, and we're trying to portray to somebody else exactly what's going on here. And we spend a lot of time understanding their story and what's important to them in order to be able to do that. But like I think there's a lot of lawyers that go into mediations. For example, we do a lot of mediations. I think it's a great avenue to try to resolve things out of court. But it's another stage. We have to convince the mediator that our client is entitled to what we're asking for, and we need them to go into another room and advocate on our behalf, even though they feel like they're the neutral third party. We need them to not be neutral. So we need to convey to them that they understand what's going on and they feel for our client, and they believe that they're entitled to what we're asking for, and we need that person to go tell somebody else that with the same emotion that we feel. And being able to do that is just it's a really, like I said, gratifying, satisfying uh objective to be able to reach, because we get a lot of great outcomes in mediation because we put a lot of time into figuring out how to tell that story in a way that's compelling to a third party who knows nothing about the case.
Yeah. Let's talk about the outcomes. You mentioned there's so much abundance in front of you so many times. And if they follow you through this process, What are the outcomes that you're really proud of achieving and helping people through these really tough times?
Well, in some cases, the business partner is going to own the business by themselves. And that's something that they have never experienced because they've always had somebody to bounce ideas off of or who was invested as much as they are. And that is a really scary prospect for a lot of people because, it's like now you're out here on your own trying to do all the things. So,
Mhm.
um, just that outcome is not a bad one. It is something that we just need to make sure our clients are prepared for. And it is a scary proposition for a lot of them. And that is an outcome that we get a lot. They buy out the other partner and they continue on their own. Another one is they leave the business altogether and they get a buyout and, they go on to start something new or retire or do something completely different. So that's also an outcome that happens a lot. Or sometimes the business is shut down completely and the assets are sold. Less common, but that's also an
I
outcome.
think the outcomes that I'm looking for are maybe more of the stories. Any of those are they're an outcome, but they're kind of a neutral, like that it's just a fact. But
Mhm.
one person now owns the business and they have, because of your help, they were able to get there a lot more easily and they thought this was an impasse. Or maybe they did decide to shut down the business, but at least now they're both at peace and can go on and create the things that are more aligned with them. Like what kind of stories do you see, regardless of the fate of the business, that hopefully there was a better outcome for the entrepreneurs themselves?
I can think of a situation where it was a married couple and they had built a business together, and our client ended up selling the business, and our client was a very difficult transition, but he ended up starting another business and transitioning into a new role, and became very successful in this new um, second venture that he had never
Mm-hmm.
imagined was. I mean, he spent years holding on to this old business, and to be able to move past that and build something new that was better than what he started with was truly the abundance in the situation. And sometimes holding on to the past can prevent us from seeing a lot of opportunity in the future, and being able to walk him through that process so that he could see that opportunity and latch on to something new and grow a new business that was hugely successful. And we consider that a win, and being able to talk to him about those opportunities and convince the other side to, give him a buyout that allows him to pursue those opportunities is our job.
Yeah. Margo, I'm curious if you've had an experience of an acrimonious relationship or a contentious thing, just like what you work with people on, whether in your business or in another element of your life. When have you felt the same way that many of your clients feel?
So when I was starting this business, I had a business partner who was with me at the a firm that we were going to leave and start this law firm, and um, we went to all the classes and we wrote a business plan and we came up with a name and we had a logo. We had all the things that we were putting in place to build this firm that we both dreamed about doing, and stepping away from a career that we I shouldn't say a career, but a job opportunity that was lucrative, that we both felt very comfortable in, to risk it on something that we had built ourselves. And very close to the date that we were supposed to start this firm, he decided that this was not something that he wanted to pursue any longer, and um, basically just dropped out. And at that point, it was like it's either me or it's me, right? I'm going to build this
Mm-hmm.
and proceed, or I'm not. And that's the same situation that a lot of the business owners find themselves in when they're going through that transition. I'm either going to do it myself, or I'm not going to let this be the hurdle or defeat me in this moment. So I can certainly, my story
Speaking of
relates to a lot of theirs.
Yeah, speaking of this moment, where were you physically, specifically, when you got this news? Was this a verbal news? Was this a phone call? Was this an email? I'm backing out from the partner. Where did this conversation happen?
It was a phone call. Um, and now that I look back on the situation, I could certainly say there were probably some signs that led up to that phone call that I could have been more aware of.
Mm-hmm.
I, in the back of my mind, I could see there was a little bit of hesitation, but I was so blinded by the possibility of what we were about to do that I was not paying too much attention to those feelings. But I received a phone call and he said, this is just isn't something that, I got kids and I got a mortgage and I got a car note and I'm not willing to risk leaving this lucrative opportunity for something that's very unknown. And, we didn't have any clients. There was no like surefire income on the other side of this. So it was a big
But you
risk.
were committed to a point. You were committed to a certain extent yourself at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know myself that I can
Hmm.
deal with adversity, and if I'm cornered, I'm gonna like there's a phrase about fish, sharks when they're cornered they keep swimming. I mean that's that's me. So
Hmm.
I was like, I might not have any clients, and there were people who told me this was the worst decision that I was gonna make, and blah blah blah, and how could I leave a firm and not have any money and clients, and I was crazy. I mean, there are a lot of people who were naysayers of this, and I heard them and I was concerned about it. I definitely heard what they were saying, and I did think it was a little crazy myself. But I believe that there was some thing in me that would pull through in this situation and make it work.
Amazing. And then somewhere along the line, a few years in, because of this, you were successful. You were running your own thing. You were experiencing abundance that you now see for your clients. When was that moment that you were like, okay, I really made it, and this is working, and this is important.
Well, I can say immediately after I left, biggest one of the biggest cases I was working on, the guy decided to work with me and the firm that I left. And I felt like that was a big sign that I had made the right decision, because I never would have known that that would have happened until I kind of took this leap of faith. And
Hmm.
then, a few years in, when I was able to hire a few people, and, it wasn't so much like feast or famine, and I wasn't driving hours to talk to somebody who could be a potential client. And just, it was a very scrappy beginning that I was willing to do anything that, I could potentially do. I'd take any case. I'd drive three
Hmm.
hours to, like when I got past that point where I was like, I want to really hone in on the things that I'm good at, and I want to get rid of all the rest, and I want to make this a niche. And, at that point, I could tell that, I'm on the right path. And I stopped working weekends, and, I had more time for my family and the things that I really care about. So it was kind of like a shift within a few years. And unfortunately, that
Tell me
shift
about a
came.
time with the family, a specific time, a vacation with the family, or something, a really sweet moment that you had.
Um, I think that the first vacation that I took and didn't take any work was in Florida. We go to Cape Coral, which is a really, it's not that much going on, which I love.
Hmm.
And to be able to be in a house, for a week with my kids and my husband and my mom, and not do work. I mean, that was something that had never happened before. It never happened when I was at the firm. It was never happened when I had started my own firm. So that was really, a turning point for me, to be able to step away and really, spend time with my family uninterrupted by this job that was very all consuming for a very long time.
Amazing. Margo, would you like to hear your story?
Yes, love to.
I'm so glad that all of you are here today in one of these most vulnerable moments of your business journeys. And I care so much about what's going on because I've been there before. In fact, it started at the very beginning of this business. Some years ago, I was working in a profitable, lucrative job at a law firm. I was working really, really hard, but I had a vision of starting my own firm and serving people in this way. And at the onset of this, I had a partner, another person in the firm, and we were going to leave and start this off. We had a logo designed, everything dreamed up. We were taking all the classes, we were ready to go and risk it all on something we built ourselves. I was really excited. I was all in. And slowly I noticed a few red flags here and there, but never quite had the discussion with my partner. There seemed to be a little bit of hesitation, a little bit of uncertainty. And one day, one morning from my own office, I get a call from him saying, I've got kids, I've got mortgages. I can't risk it all for this opportunity. I've got to step away. And I realized in that moment that I'd been building something with somebody who had totally different values than me. I had exposed myself to a problem. And now I was out here on my own. And yeah, there were lots of naysayers wondering if I could do this or build this. And now even the person that I was trusting most in this, that I had liked, that I had understood, turns out they're not in. And it's either me or it's me that's going to do this. I had to get past the emotions and the fear and stayed committed to my vision. And there were so many times in this process that I knew and that I wished for someone that could actively listen and understand everything that was happening and going through, and guide us and point out what we really wanted and needed in this. Hopefully get us away from having a problem earlier, getting clear on what we both really wanted from this, and to capture the real essence of the story that we were both trying to create here. And that's what I built into my firm and my business, and started to drive anywhere going through this same problem, this same challenge that I went through, finding a way to get clear on what people really wanted so that they could access the real abundance that was in front of them. And over the course of many years and a lot of costly and painful mistakes, I started serving more clients and growing and creating the abundance that I knew was possible for me and the vision that I knew was possible for me. And I can remember one weekend taking my first ever real vacation without any work to Cape Coral, Florida, a mellow place in a house with my kids, my husband, my mom, all hanging around. And for the first time, me never doing any work. This had never happened before, not at the law firm, not in the early days of my business. I can't remember having a vacation like this ever before. And I remember just taking a breath and seeing the kids running around and my husband, and realizing that I made it. I'm so glad that I stayed true to this vision, that I was clear on what I want, and I accessed the abundance. Now, for me, this happened at a very early stage of my business journey. For you, it might be happening earlier, it might be happening later. A lot of times it happens when we are at our most successful. And I am here to share with you my process to listen and get clear on what you want, and to capture the real essence of the story that we want to tell here, so that it can have a happy ending for everyone involved.
I love it.
Thank you. I love the detail of yeah. It's always a good family vacation, and actually being able to enjoy your life is what we all really want. And we forget about that for so many different reasons. And so there's something beautiful about this.
I agree.
Well, Margo, it's been a pleasure creating and exploring with you today. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, and where can we go to learn more about you?
Just thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is, an amazing platform, and you certainly have a gift of storytelling. So it is really moving to speak with you. And I thomaslawplc.com. You can find everything and anything you want to know about the firm and my swim journeys. And we're also on LinkedIn and Thomas Law Office PLC on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the social media channels.
Amazing. All right, Margo Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today on the Story Engine podcast.
Thank you.